Hi, my name is Trisha Low. I'm very happy to be with you all today. I've joked a lot that I feel a little underqualified to be giving this lecture, but I do mean it. It's an honor to be engaged with so much wonderful thinking. And in honor of that, I decided to share a few of my thoughts that are a little bit more in progress and not yet cohered about nostalgia and about the form of melodrama. So I hope that you will bear with me and be patient. This talk will go for about 25 minutes. And here we go. It's 4 years ago, 5. I'm at a house reading in San Francisco, looking for a section of my book to perform. Summer, everything submerged under a sheen of sweat, its soft cling like plastic wrap. I'm tired, trip over limbs in a living room. Something familial about gathering like this, squashed, not enough room for everyone. Something intimate, so I give up on art. I tell a story instead about my grandma. She is young, maybe 6. Her parents have gone to work. She is hungry. There is nothing to eat. She paces. She searches the cabinets. She looks on the stove for any leftover rice. There is none. But in the kitchen, she finds a plastic bucket filled with water. Inside it is a giant live eel. My grandma is barely 4 feet tall. She dips her hand into the bucket and tries to grab hold of the eel. It's slick. It struggles. The bucket falls over with the force of the eel's body, a single lean muscle. It thrashes from side to side. The water swamps the kitchen floor, a deluge. The eel throws itself upon my grandmother, and they become a monstrous flailing whole. It gasps for breath. My grandma can't get a foothold. She throws her arms out for anything she can find. Miraculously, she grabs the rice cooker and finds enough strength to crush the eel's head deep inside it. She crams the rest of its body into the pot and locks the lid. The pot is heavy, but she manages to get it on the stove. My grandma boils the shit out of that eel. Her parents arrive home as she finally opens the pot, but the eel is inedible. Everyone knows you have to skin an eel before you cook it. Otherwise, it's impenetrable, like leather. Her mother throws the eel out and scolds her. Both of them are hungry, so together they make rice. They eat dinner as they do every day. Later, my grandmother picks a piece of eel out of the trash and eats it furtively. To her, it tastes sweet. It's a good parable, I think, but a little melodramatic, no, jokes one of my friends afterwards. I laugh. It's common knowledge, after all, how I'm openly invested in an aesthetics of melodrama, own multiple house dresses and vintage robes, watch over and over again those Cirque and Stahl and Raina Werner Fassbinder movies, Dorothy Malone kicking her heels up in malicious feathered pink in Written on the Wind, Jean Tierney pregnant and throwing herself down white steps, a blur of floral wallpaper and Leave Her to Heaven, suicide as revenge, hysteria as spite. In melodrama, madness, Fassbinder writes, is a kind of hope, a means by which emotions are potent enough to exceed and undercut the suburban houses, structural frames we have built to restrain us. A space in which the continual pettiness of human action and bourgeois social drama reflect larger oppressive structures, sure, but also teach us a smaller lesson about loneliness and how it makes us lie, both to and about ourselves. How wrong it is that we should lie, Fassbinder says, and how dumb. Imitation of life. My friend's comment has sting. If the story I told is melodramatic, then how much have I misrepresented my grandma's life in it? What is a story of a homeland or an identity anyway, apart from what has already been made a lie by the fact of its telling, a phantom of the truth? I'm back in Hong Kong visiting my grandma. It's 2016 and she is 94 years old. I love my grandma because she is one of the toughest people I have ever met. She pours me tea out of a plastic thermos in her sitting room. I ask her about her life. what it was like in a British colony as a child, about the years she spent in an orphanage which earned her her education as a girl child, what it was like to be the daughter of parents who abandoned her because she was too expensive to feed. My grandmother has a bad leg. It keeps her from going too many places, but her mind is sharp. Her favorite activity is sitting in her easy chair and listening to the stock market on the radio because she's still aggressively trading. When I ask her why she doesn't watch the market on TV or the internet, she shakes her head and says she likes her habits the way they are. When I ask her about the British, she says they treated us like pigs. When I ask her about the orphanage, she tells me there were a lot of lice there. And when I ask her about the war, she says it could have been worse. I want some narrative, but when I ask for more, she shrugs. That's the reality of life. What do you want me to say? Why dwell in the past when you can focus on making money? She chides. Money is what makes things happen in the world. What a waste of energy, she says, to not keep looking forward. But I can't let go. It's 2017 night, and friends who attended demonstrations during Trump's inauguration are slapped with charges for felony rioting and face up to 60 years in prison. It gets harder and harder to reconcile myself to the present. I fall prey to historical decadence, watch a documentary about ACT UP, a group working to fight AIDS in the 80s, swipe red lipstick over my lower lip, and put on a 50s style cream blouse. I watch young queers throw the ashes of their loved ones dead onto the White House lawn. Fucking awful, but I can't help it. I'm nostalgic for that moment. Everyone together and the world falling apart. Everyone fighting, creating, and falling in love in one frenzied, swarming mass. A moment when it still feels like something could be done. Unlike, what time is it? Now, shit, I don't even know. That's the thing about nostalgia. It's a strange muddling of temporalities, the desire to simultaneously romanticize our past and create our future in its image, to return to a utopic golden age when everything appears simpler, a time before the world changed. Indeed, in her book, The Future of Nostalgia, Svetlana Boym sees nostalgia as the byproduct of a capitalist world in which progress is fetishized. According to Boym, humans were once allowed a span of experience, a space of psychic time that allowed us to assimilate the recent past into the present and to reconcile it with the unknown horizon of the future. But capitalism's centralized ideal of a better future is inextricably tied with rapid spatial expansion, colonization, and renewal. Speed becomes essential. In order to survive, we can no longer live in the present. We are forced to dwell in a compulsive, never-ending race towards the future. And in this new normal, there is no longer any psychic space for synthesizing our experiences. We begin to suffer a sense of constant displacement. Exhausted, we desire a place to rest. We mourn the comfort of a vanished past, made all the more glamorous by our inability to wholly assimilate it into our present, our inability to process its flaws. In other words, nostalgia means we begin to long for a phantom homeland, a symptom of our ever-encroaching capitalist future, a future that promises us everything but the solace for which we long. It's 2020. No, 2021, and everything stands still at the same time as the news cycles rapidly a vortex, widespread COVID-19, police targeting Black communities, and youth at Hong Kong protests. US leftists deny state violence against Uyghurs as anti-Asian violence is on the rise, and yet protesters are massacred by the Myanmar army with nary a word from the rest of the world. A friend of a friend, a gig worker in Philadelphia, is hit by a car on the job. In the Bay Area, rents rise and fall, trapped in the clutches of the tech industry. Faced with the complexity of late-stage global and racial capitalism, I am scalded with an anger so deep that I am unable to sustain it. I shrivel. Sure, I volunteer at the free clinic. I go to the protests. But mostly, I work from my bed, struck by a sudden, insensible homesickness. I crave food, plain congee, rice rolls, conjure the scent of my mother's laundry detergent. I rectify my ennui with the escapism of watching Chinese serial melodrama. I linger in nostalgia, indulge in hour after hour of the lengthy 60 to 80 episode TV shows my family used to watch together, riveted while eating dinner. Chinese melodrama is, well, just that, melodrama, and so it relies upon scripts and formulas to evoke high sentiment through a number of cliched permutations. I root for the woman who pretends to be a man in order to have access to knowledge she might otherwise not. Watch concubines kill each other's children to jockey for the emperor's affection. I love the period costumes. I put on a cheongsam to feel silk on my skin. I reminisce about tearing up alongside my dad at needlessly tragic plot detail, gory death. Alone, I wipe my tears away. I wonder if there's something essential about melodrama's form that allowed my family to project themselves, their subjectivities into, something they wanted to express and share with me, but like my grandma, could never bring themselves to narrativize out of the events of their own lives. Endurance, perhaps, and suffering. How these shows always begin with extreme adversity that takes tremendous time and effort to overcome, but mostly just repeats itself, usually worse. How this happens over and over again for hundreds of episodes in numerous forms, seemingly never to end and turning increasingly absurd. Not a comforting idea. And yet I started watching these shows because they comforted me. Their serpentine cause and effect, endless emotion over logic. And yet their unrealistic endings, always rushed, tied up in illogical solutions, less happy or tragic than just the quickest route between point A and point B. Chinese melodramas are designed to provoke irreducible emotion through increasingly problematized situations in order to pad out its long serial form. At the same time, its flimsy solutions ultimately provide no catharsis. The fact that I found them so satisfying stymied me. But the more I thought about it, was there anything that reflected the state of the world more than the simultaneous complexity and reductive vacuousness of melodrama? Was there anything that exemplified my yearning for a stable fantasy of home more than the melodramatic feeling of both too much and not enough? Rainer Werner Fassbinder describes one of his favorite melodramas, All That Heaven Allows, directed by his idol Douglas Sirk, thusly. Jane Wyman is a rich widow. Rock Hudson prunes trees for her. But Rock is 15 years younger than Jane, and Jane is completely integrated into the social life of her small American town. At the beginning, Rock is in love with nature. Jane at first doesn't love anything because she has everything. Later on, Jane goes back to Rock because she has headaches, which is what happens to us all if we don't fuck once in a while. But now she's back, there's still no happy ending. If anyone made their love life that complicated for themselves, they wouldn't be able to live happily ever after. And yet the movie is simple and it's beautiful and everybody sees the point. One could describe the melodrama I've made of my life thusly. Trisha Low lives in the West. She loves Dorothy Wong, her grandmother, who has lived her whole life in Hong Kong. But Dorothy is 66 years older than Trisha, and Trisha is completely integrated into the social life of her American town. At the beginning, Dorothy is in love with hard work, material success, and the value of her suffering. Trisha at first doesn't know how to love her heritage because she has everything. Later, she feels aimless, nostalgic for a homeland she can't fully know. But now she's back in Hong Kong talking to Dorothy, and there's still no resolution, just an imperfect story sifted through damningly human priorities, the murk that class and war and Confucianism and gender have produced over 90 plus years of Dorothy's life. If anyone were to make their family heritage that complicated for themselves, they wouldn't be able to live happily ever after. And yet coming home and claiming an identity is simple and it's beautiful and everybody sees the point. Whatever, love and revolution, destiny and doom. I guess they make things simple when there are so many moving parts. It's why we have the cinema. Other times, things aren't that complicated, and that's why they seem real. It's why we have identity. But it's all just a story we tell ourselves nonetheless. Something imaginary, right? It's fair to say that traditional forms of articulating identity are based in the similarity of a shared wound. But in a recent essay in N+1, Disambiguation, a Tragedy, Nancy Da writes that centering the Chinese diasporic consciousness means putting something plainly ugly on display. By ugly, she's referring to Sian Nai's theory of contemporary affects, to feelings that don't lend themselves to catharsis. Unlike traditional forms of identity, which render collective devastation sublime, elegant, and therefore recognizable with narratives of getting out from under, speaking truth to power, and newly fashioning the self having identified and named a trauma. In Nan's experience, and in mine, stories of the Chinese diaspora, although we don't intend to speak for anyone else, blunder along, resistant to narratives of overcoming. In other words, for Nanda, what is ugly about the Chinese diasporic consciousness, what holds it back, is also nostalgic. If the purpose of identity is to resolutely assert the needs of a minority in the present, nostalgia, on the other hand, is mute. Refusing the realism of the present, it defects to what's imaginary, a phantom homeland based in a fantasy of the past. And if nostalgia is a symptom of holding such temporal contradiction without catharsis, then perhaps melodrama is its perfect aesthetic form. As Jeffrey Nowell Smith writes, the importance of melodrama lies precisely in its ideological failure. Because it cannot accommodate its problems either in a real present or an ideal future, it lays them open in their shameless contradictoriness. Melodrama, like nostalgia, is the superimposition of dream and everyday life, past and present, home and abroad, a point of uncanny cathexis that doesn't express, but illustrates how we cannot express, and yet somehow allows us to acknowledge the inarticulability of our lived contradictions through points of emotional intensity. In COVID isolation, virtual life flourishes. I seek deeper engagement with the Chinese melodrama I'm watching and begin to engage in fandom, online community built around discussion and the creation of art based on these fictional series. I write fan fiction, something I haven't done for a full decade since I was a miserable high schooler seeking attention and connection from within the anonymous ether of the internet. It's deliciously regressive. Spending time online, I learn intimate details of other fans' lives. I indulge in feelings of laziness, ambivalence, boredom, scroll past screenshots and chat logs. I validate myself with the shallow gratification of likes on Twitter and emoji on Discord. I sink into nostalgia for a past self. I am a shapeless mass of emotion seeping out of these virtual forms. But are you having an online affair? My partner asked me, only half joking. No, I laugh. But even I can admit I'm finding relief in presenting a virtual persona, fantasized and flexible. I revel in my new ability to bury the complexity of my experience, the pressure of inhabiting a coherent identity within the asynchronous triviality and accumulated negative affect of social media. In the non-catharsis of this virtual forum, I find myself, I reject myself, I oscillate, I have become not me. In her work on virtual life and the enduring ephemeral, Wendy Chen writes that if a computer memory is like anything, it is like erasable writing. But a penciled word can be erased because graphite is soft. Similarly, a computer's memory can be rewritten because its surface constantly fades. Less like infinite storage and more like quick erase whiteboard, the virtual forum and social media is increasingly a means through which we can shed personal data from selfies to screenshots and, as Dandy Meng writes, outsource our memories so we can safely forget. If Boehm sees that our fantasies of homeland are based in romanticizing our past, then what is virtuality's impact on the nature of nostalgia when our forms of memory and means of access to it have so drastically changed? When evidence of one's personal history can be continually altered and replaced in the short memory of of the infinite Twitter scroll, even as dead copies of it circulate in an online archive forever. Virtuality seems to alter temporality itself, squashing and compressing past, present, and future, so our memories are deferred forward, easily displaced and mediated. Online, I can recreate myself eternally as persona, striving towards a luster of infinite perfectibility. I can hold aberrant parts of myself hostage in a contradictory melodrama of self. In my forays into online fandom, I get in touch with other Chinese folks living away from home. We share memories and recipes, discuss family stories, and how these cultural objects have helped us reconnect to the nuances of diasporic difficulty, not simply the positive aspects of our experience, but the challenges of assimilation and racism. Some days it feels like solidarity. But of course, life is not simply the digital, but what lies outside of it. Even as positive forces of representation, cultural objects are not separable from the systems that have produced them. Hong Kong serial melodramas are produced by TVB, a station once known for its independence and yet now neutral towards Beijing's encroaching control of Hong Kong democracy. The pretty boy actors venerated in fandom are often mobilized as ambassadors of the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, as propaganda to garner loyalty from a younger generation of citizens. I encounter people globally whose dissatisfaction with politics has made them so sympathetic to the purported communism of the Chinese state that they're willing to overlook egregious human rights violations. One white person even engages in digital yellowface, pretending to be Chinese diaspora to gain more followers. Tankies even in fandom, frowny face. I text a chat of my closest friends to a flurry of laugh and sob emojis. Can't get away. The danger of nostalgia, Svetlana Boehm writes, is that it tends to confuse the actual home and the imaginary one. In extreme cases, it can create a phantom homeland for the sake of which one is ready to die or to kill. For Boehm, the nostalgic desire to return to an imaginary and untainted homeland is the foundation upon which nationalist movements, from xenophobic fascism to white supremacy, are built. And now with virtual space and its malleable memory, folks have the ability to create simulations of these fantasies. Digital tools have provided us the means to fabricate the nostalgic imaginary directly into the present, so it starts to feel proximate, intimate, real. I watched social bonds coalesce into literal phantom homelands on Twitter and in listservs. The minor affect of the online scroll that I so enjoy and value turns threatening when spewing ideology. If melodrama is a form that can hold contradiction, the sad truth is that it does always foreclose possibility. Its hurried, ridiculous conclusions often making redundant the very ambivalences and ambiguities it had posited in the first place. Melodrama, with its cliched, tragic, or happy endings, when taken at face value, tends to simply confirm what everybody had already assumed in the first place. Must things always cohere? I don't know. In this paper, I do not aim to suggest nostalgia or melodrama as inherently revolutionary or collective forms. It is my belief that there are no inherently revolutionary or collective forms. In fact, if there's anything that my thinking on these two forms has shown me, it is that exactly what I find valuable about them is also what is dangerous. an intensity through which inexpressible contradictions can be embodied, at the same time as a means by which they are foreclosed. Which leads me exactly back to the question I began this paper struggling with, and perhaps I have left you struggling with: how to mobilize and respond to global crises collectively, while still acknowledging our specific emotional and fantastical attachments to loved ones, our homelands, our disparate experiences. Obviously, there are no good answers, but for Nanda, answering this question has to begin with a process of what she calls disambiguation or distinction making. But what does this mean specifically? I read it as an insistence on owning up to and examining melodramatic or nostalgic processes in political life, even if these are inconvenient or politically bad. Not dwelling in or rejecting those ugly feelings, those contradictions of desire in favor of the elegance of a cohesive identity or activist efficacy, but insisting on being honest with oneself and others about the conditions under which those fantasies have been produced. In other words, asking genuinely, what happened in my life that allowed for these attachments and fantasies to be possible? By reckoning with one another in the present as a form of protest. The poet Zaina Al-Sus writes that the best part about being a materialist is that there won't ever really be dystopia or utopia. Just it is what it is and what we could make it be within the withins. So I go to the rally with my friends. At Hot Pot afterwards, someone bitches about their family and I roll my eyes, but we toast an Asian grandma for hitting back against her racist attacker. The chili oil burns on my lips. The homeland we want to return to might always remain a fantasy, but I can glimpse shards of it in the ways we are relentlessly honest and generous with each other, the ways in which we can acknowledge and parse how we are inconsistent, nostalgic, or melodramatic, and care for and work together anyway. And perhaps it's like this that we can start to see our phantom homeland not so much as a place to find or to build or to imagine, but as the meatiness of what is invoked as we yearn for it together, what we can put on the shadow of its bones. Thank you very much.